Hi guys, Olive here today to talk about fiction and nonfiction matchups. I've done several videos like this in the past, but in case this is the first one you've ever seen, the basic idea is that you pick at least one fiction book and at least one nonfiction book that are similar in some kind of a way. You read them either at the exact same time or one shortly before the other. You read them around the same time in order to get more out of both of them. There are so many different ways that you can pair up books like this, but just for example, you could read a fiction book alongside a work of nonfiction that the author of the fiction book consulted for research during their process. You could read a historical fiction book alongside a nonfiction work that looks more at the time period or the specific historical figure that the historical fiction is centering around. You could read a nonfiction book that discusses the cultural impact of a specific classic work of fiction while you're reading that classic work of fiction. And those are just a few examples of how you could pair up fiction and nonfiction. There are so many more options out there. However, it can be a little bit difficult to know ahead of time what fiction books and what nonfiction books would make good pairs, because before you've read the books, you obviously don't know what their contents are. So how can you know what books are going to make a good match? So I've decided to make it a yearly tradition during Nonfiction November to give you some suggestions, some examples of pairings that I think do work really well or could work really well. And in today's video, I have 5 new pairings to share with you. So let's talk about the first matchup. I would highly suggest that you pair Affinity by Sarah Waters with Spook by Mary Roach. Now, these are 2 very popular authors of fiction and nonfiction, respectively, that you wouldn't automatically think to pair up with one another, but let me explain my reasoning. Affinity by Sarah Waters is about an upper-class woman in the Victorian era who is deeply depressed. And because she needs something to do with her time, she starts being a lady visitor. She starts making visits to a women's prison in London. She becomes particularly fond of one inmate, a spirit medium, a former spirit medium named Selena, who was imprisoned after one of her seances went awry. On the other side of the coin, Spook by Mary Roach is all about the science, if there is any science, of the afterlife. She travels all over the world researching ghosts, reincarnation, and in general the spiritualism movement, and she tries to see if there's any science to support those beliefs. One section of Spook by Mary Roach discusses seances, not unlike the ones that Selena from Affinity, someone like Selena from Affinity, would have put on during this time period. Mary Roach talks about what it would have been like to experience one of these seances and what the point of them was, what the mediums were trying to achieve. If you do decide to take this recommendation and read these books as a pair, though, I would suggest that you start with the novel, you start with Affinity, read it in its entirety first, and then move on to Spook very shortly thereafter. I think the nonfiction book has the ability to spoil a couple of elements from the novel, and I don't want that to happen to you. But I do think these 2 books would be great read around the same time, particularly in October or whenever else you like to read your spooky books. Okay, on to the next pairing. I suggest that you read If I Had Your Face by Frances Chaw alongside Beauty by Bree Lee. And the reason I make that suggestion is that both of these books have to do with beauty standards. Bree Lee is the author of Eggshell Skull, which is a memoir that was one of my favorite nonfiction books of the year a couple years back, but Beauty is her newest book, and in it she talks about her own struggles feeling comfortable in her skin when the beauty standards out there in the world can be so demanding and so painfully unreachable. And I think at least a couple of the characters in If I Had Your Face by Frances Chaw would also deeply understand that struggle. There are 4 main characters in If I Had Your Face, 4 women living in South Korea who are busy dealing with their everyday current struggles while they are all wrestling demons from their past. There's one character in particular who works at a high-end room salon, which is a place where men go to spend exorbitant amounts of money on liquor and to flirt with beautiful women. The young woman who works at this room salon feels an intense amount of pressure to be beautiful. You could even say her livelihood depends upon it. So she goes under the knife to achieve the look that she wants. I actually did a ton of research into plastic surgery in South Korea and why it's so common as part of the review I did of this book for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'll link that down below if you'd like to read it. I did all that research because the idea of being beautiful is such a central part of this book. I mean, it's even in the title. Being jealous of someone else's looks is literally in the title. So I think reading this novel alongside Bree Lee's very personal account of never feeling good enough when it comes to looks could really help you get inside the minds of a couple of the characters in the novel. Next up, I'd like to do something a little bit different and actually recommend a trio of books. There are two nonfiction books that I think both pair up pretty equally well with what is probably going to be my favorite fiction book of the year, The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, which is essentially the entire life story of an American botanist in the 19th century. It is gorgeous, it is heartbreaking, it is everything. The first nonfiction book that I think pairs with The Signature of All Things so perfectly is Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I actually have to give credit to someone in my comment section for giving me the idea to put these two books together, but they are absolutely perfect for one another because the botanist in The Signature of All Things studies moss. You wouldn't think a book about moss would be terribly exciting, but the book is so lovely. It is so nice to just sink into it, which is the same vibe as The Signature of All Things as well. So they are perfect for one another in several regards. But also Sea People by Christina Thompson is a great match for The Signature of All Things because, without giving too much away, there is a portion of this book that takes place in Tahiti, and Sea People is all about Polynesia, the islands of Polynesia, how populations of people may have found themselves inhabiting these islands and what happened when the Europeans came along. I consider it such good luck that these three books came into my life around the same time. I read them at around the same time because they all fit together so perfectly. So I definitely do recommend all three of these books as a trio, but I think if you didn't want to take on all three books at once, either one of the nonfiction books would be a perfect match for The Signature of All Things. But moving back to just a plain old duo, I would suggest that you read Florence Adler Swims Forever by Rachel Beanland alongside The Great Swim by Gavin Mortimer. The titular character of this book is, as you would guess, a swimmer, and her goal at the start of the book is to train herself to get ready to swim across the English Channel. And part of the reason that is her goal is that in the summer of 1926, when she was 12 years old, she heard on the radio that Gertrude Ederle broke the men's record for swimming across the channel. And The Great Swim by Gavin Mortimer isn't just about Gertrude Ederle and her major accomplishment, but it's also about three other women who took on the challenge of swimming across the channel. I think this nonfiction book is the perfect match for this novel because not only do you get the good historical context, but you also get to learn more about Florence by learning more about who she idolized. And finally, the first book in the last matchup that I would like to recommend to you in this video is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I would like to recommend that you read it alongside the new Sylvia Plath biography called Red Comet by Heather Clark. The Bell Jar is a modern classic that's considered to be at least semi-autobiographical. It is about a 19-year-old named Esther Greenwood who spends a summer in New York City working for a women's magazine, but after she returns home before she's due to go back to school, she falls into a very deep depression. And partially because elements of The Bell Jar were said to have been inspired by things that happened in Sylvia Plath's own life, I think it makes a lot of sense to read The Bell Jar, either for the first time or as a reread, alongside this new comprehensive biography. So that's it for this year's batch of fiction and nonfiction pairing recommendations. I will put links in the description box below to all of the videos I've done previously like this one, in case you're looking for more recommendations. I, of course, would love to hear from you if any of these pairings sound appealing, or if you have a pairing of your own that you would like to recommend. That or any other more general comments or questions you may have can go in the comment section below, but if you would prefer to reach out to me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.